Welcome to another edition of the Dean Legge Show here on Dog Post. Georgia Notre Dame this week. Is this the biggest Georgia home game ever? Maybe. We'll talk about that a little bit coming up soon. Actually, we're going to talk about that in the pregame show. Do you watch the pregame show? It comes on the night before, morning before Georgia's games each week. Georgia Notre Dame this week, a big game, number 3 and number 7, a CBS game, blah, 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 blah. Everybody knows the deal. So we're going to try to cut through the chase here just a little bit for everybody and talk about the Dogs and the Irish. This is obviously a game where Georgia is favored by at least as many as 2 touchdowns. Recording this, you never know how the line can jump at any moment. But right this second, Georgia is a pretty significant favorite. Anything over 10 is a pretty significant line for what would be essentially the equivalent of an SEC football game. So the Dogs considered significant favorites to win the game. Here's a couple of interesting things that do kind of matter. Brian Kelly, like most coaches, has struggled against top 25 teams. Notre Dame is 13 of 14 in top 25 matchups under Brian Kelly. He's 10 and 14 when both teams are in the top 25. When Notre Dame is the lower ranked team, Notre Dame is 6 and 10 going into that's the result of the game. So a real challenge for Notre Dame, no question. I mean, this is a game that Notre Dame has to win, I think, to get into the playoff and win the national championship. They really did not play well. Maybe they played well, but they certainly didn't get a good result against Clemson in the Cotton Bowl. I'm sure that's hovering over them the same way that Georgia is having the Sugar Bowl hover over the Dogs. Whereas I actually think Clemson beat Notre Dame much worse than Georgia was beat by Texas. That's for sure. There's not much comparison between a touchdown and 4 touchdowns, but both with not ideal endings of last year. And those have been hovering over the top of these two teams. I mean, Notre Dame's inched up in the rankings here lately because of losses for teams like, or bad play for teams like Michigan and so forth. But there's definitely plenty on the line here, and last season was last season, and for Kirby Smart and Georgia, they know the challenge lying ahead for them against Notre Dame.
Great game to have, non-conference game, get to play at home, and school with such tradition as Notre Dame. Looking forward to the opportunity. I know a lot of Georgia fans have had this one marked on their schedule for a long time, and so have a lot of Notre Dame fans. So we're excited to get the opportunity. They've got a really good football team. I got a lot of respect for Coach Kelly and the job he's done and what he's built there, and their staff actually is one of the best staffs in the country. So got good football players, and it should be a great opportunity for both teams.
Well, it will be a challenge for Georgia. I mean, this is the best team they've played since Texas, and they didn't play well when they played Texas. So this is a game with a lot on the line. I mean, Georgia can lose this game and keep going, but it's not an ideal situation. You'd lose all your margin for error. That's what happened when they lost to LSU in 2018. What happened when they lost to LSU, when they lost there in 17 for Auburn, 18 for LSU. But nonetheless, for the Dogs, Georgia's been really good at home, and Notre Dame coach Brian Kelly understands that this is a very tricky situation for the Irish. They're coming into this thing as underdogs. Coaches don't talk like that, but they know that they are in a real fight here. Here's what Brian Kelly had to say about facing Georgia in Sanford Stadium.
The competition that we're playing this weekend will certainly require us to play our very best. Kirby Smart and the Georgia program are synonymous with winning and being successful, and we're quite aware of that. We played them a couple of years ago in a hard-fought game, which we came up short. So, again, we know the talent that they have offensively, an outstanding offensive line. I think they got 4 or 5 starters back there. Andrew Thomas is probably a first-round draft pick, but they're extremely physical.
Not going to be easy. Not going to be easy at all for Notre Dame. The Irish will be playing an AP-ranked number 3 team for the 21st time ever on Saturday evening. That means that they will be trying to get a slightly better record. Their record's not that bad against the number 3 team in the country all time. 7-11-2. Obviously, 2 doesn't exist anymore in college football. That's in their last 20 matchups. Their most recent win over a number 3 team came in 2005 when Notre Dame beat Michigan in Ann Arbor 17-10. So that was some time ago now, almost 15 seasons, when the Irish are 39-60-5 all time against top 5 ranked opponents. That is probably one of the better marks for any program. That's a lot of top 5 wins, 39. So they're looking for number 40 this week, and we'll see how that goes. They're looking for their first top 5 win over under Brian Kelly. So they have not won a game against a top 5 team under Brian Kelly. The last time they won a top 5 game, again, was against Michigan, who was also number 3 at the time. So maybe that's lining up for the Irish. One thing that they're going to have a real hard time with, though, is dealing with the steadiness of Jake Fromm. So Jake is 26 of 42 for 601 yards with 5 touchdowns, 1 sack, and no interceptions. I don't even know if the sack was on him. I'm trying to remember it in these last few games. Jake's not had to do a lot so far this season, but that's probably just the way Georgia likes it. Brian Kelly, on the other hand, knows that Jake Fromm is a formidable foe, and he will be a trouble Saturday night in Sanford Stadium.
And a big offensive line that moves very, very well and protects Jake Fromm very well. Jake Fromm, obviously played as a freshman against us and showed great poise, and has continued to, obviously develop to being one of the premier quarterbacks in college football, throwing the ball at 75% completion percentage. He's an outstanding player, can make all the throws, plays with great confidence.
Here's the good news for Notre Dame. They're only giving up 143 yards in the air right now. Now, Louisville just couldn't throw it, period. And I don't think that's unique. That wasn't necessarily what Notre Dame did. But the other thing in all of this is that Notre Dame's given up so many yards in the run game that it's why would you throw? And for Georgia, averaging as much as they are on the ground, almost 290 yards per game on the ground, why would you even risk throwing it? I mean, I know it's a silly thing to say, but for Georgia, I expect them to pound Notre Dame early and often, make the Irish try to stick with them. Both these teams have not that bad special teams play, frankly. I think Georgia's probably a little bit better on that front. Rodrigo Blankenship has become a very good kicker for Georgia. He needs to be good in big moments. This is a big moment. He's been pretty good in big moments. I mean, you look at the Rose Bowl, that was a long kick that gave Georgia momentum. Obviously, the game winner against Kentucky in 16, the game winner against Notre Dame in 17. So Rodrigo's been good. He also missed the kick against Alabama in 18. That would have put Georgia up 17 points in the third quarter. That would have been tough for the Tide to come back from, but missing a 30-yarder allowed Alabama to come back in and gain momentum. So Rodrigo is a big deal, and then Jake Camarda has got to have a good game for Georgia as well. The big thing with Jake is not distance so much as his direction, according to Kirby. Kirby's talked about that quite a bit this week, about how Jake Camarda has got to get the sand wedge out, the pitching wedge, whatever you want to call it. The driver's working great, but, drive for show, putt for dough, I think is the old phrase. So the specialists will be a big deal for Georgia. Keep an eye on Tyler Simmons. Georgia's doing really well in the return game. They've returned more punts than anyone in the SEC. That's probably not really saying much for Vanderbilt and company, who Georgia's played against. Georgia's averaging about 18 yards a punt return. Now, there's a lot of teams in the SEC who are averaging pretty big numbers, but that Georgia's returned it 9 times. You can do the math yourself. So keep in touch with all those things. The special teams is a big, I don't know if it's a third of the game, as we always say. It's probably a good 15 to 20%, and that's going to matter a lot on those plays. I mean, if you're Notre Dame, you get down by 10, or maybe you're within 3 late in the late third, you do a trick play. There's all these things are things to concern yourself with. Another thing that's such a big deal this weekend, I don't want to overstate it or understate it. The recruiting weekend at Georgia is going to be huge. I would talk about this normally, but if you see in the upper left-hand corner up there on the screen, just click that video right now and you can listen to everything Matt DeBerry has to say about the Dogs, the recruiting weekend, and everything. Okay, with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll see you over at dogpost.com. Check Matt's video, subscribe down below. Dean Legge, we'll see you on the pregame show.